It was a cold, unassuming morning in Hampton, Virginia, United States, on January 31st, 2022. The kind of morning where the world moves slowly, with the coastal breeze brushing against rows of modest townhomes. Life appeared normal on this winter day, until a chilling report shook the very heart of this tight-knit community. Codi Bigsby, a father of 4, made a desperate call to 911. His voice, while calm, carried an eerie weight as he told authorities his youngest son, 4-year-old Codi Bigsby, was missing. Codi claimed that when he awoke that morning, Codi was nowhere to be found. He alleged that his son had wandered off from their home at Buckrow Point Townhomes, located in Hampton. A missing child. Words that strike fear into every parent's heart. For the residents of this Virginia community, it was a moment that brought them together. Almost instantly, neighbors began gathering, organizing search efforts alongside law enforcement. But as the hours passed, an unsettling cloud began to form. There were no signs of forced entry into the house, no evidence that Codi had wandered far. Despite extensive searches, drones, helicopters, and K-9 units combing the nearby woods, streams, and open fields, there was no trace of the boy. And while the community prayed and hoped for a miracle, an unspoken question hung in the air. Was Codi Bigsby telling the truth? From the beginning, Codi Bigsby's demeanor raised eyebrows. He didn't display the raw panic or urgency one might expect from a parent who had just lost their child. Observers noted his composed tone during the 911 call and his behavior during police questioning. It felt off, detached even, leading many to question whether his concern for Codi was genuine. Could a father really be so calm in the face of such tragedy? Was it guilt masquerading as composure? The media and public began to scrutinize his every move. His interviews and statements lacked the emotional weight of a grieving parent. No tears, no trembling voice, no desperate pleas for his son's safe return. This wasn't just suspicion brewing. It was a community torn between wanting to find Codi alive and fearing the worst about the one person who should have protected him most, his father. As days turned into weeks, Hampton residents became both the driving force behind search efforts and the loudest voices of criticism. Candlelight vigils were held, and posters of Codi's innocent, smiling face adorned every street corner. The image of this child, a bright-eyed boy who deserved safety and love, became a symbol of hope and heartbreak. But alongside this outpouring of support, whispers of suspicion grew louder. Stories of Codi's past began to surface, painting a troubling picture of his parenting. Neighbors described hearing arguments and fights from the home. Some even claimed that Codi had been seen disciplining his children harshly, though these accounts were hard to confirm. This led to a divisive question. Could the very man who reported Codi missing be responsible for his disappearance? And if so, how long had this facade been maintained? 10 days into the investigation, Codi Bigsby was arrested, but not on charges related to Codi's disappearance. Instead, he faced child neglect charges, unrelated to his missing son. Authorities revealed that during interrogations, Codi admitted to leaving his children, aged 5, 4, and 2 toddlers, home alone for extended periods. The neglect charges were a damning reflection of Codi's role as a father, but what about Codi? As police dug deeper, an even more horrifying revelation came to light. Investigators now believe that Codi Bigsby had been dead long before Codi reported him missing. While Codi maintained his innocence, the evidence pointed to a grim reality. The exact details of how or when Codi died were shrouded in mystery, but one thing was clear. The search for Codi was no longer a rescue mission. It had become a recovery mission. Why would a father wait months to report his child missing? Was this an attempt to cover up an accident, or was it something far more sinister? And what kind of mind could carry on with daily life while knowing the truth? These questions plagued not just Hampton, Virginia, but an entire nation as the story spread like wildfire. It's hard to imagine the suffering of a 4-year-old boy who was robbed of his chance to grow up, to experience love, joy, and safety. For many, the pain of this case wasn't just about Codi Bigsby. It was about a system that seemed to have failed Codi. Neighbors spoke out, questioning why Child Protective Services hadn't intervened earlier. Was this another case of missed warning signs? Could Codi's life have been saved if someone, anyone, had stepped in? And what does this say about the cracks in the child welfare system? These were the uncomfortable questions the community and the nation began to ask themselves. We are left with the heart-wrenching image of a little boy who will never be able to tell his story. His father's voice may have been the one that reported him missing, but it's also the voice that keeps the truth hidden. In Hampton, Virginia, Codi Bigsby is more than a missing child. He is a painful reminder of how fragile life can be and how easily trust can be broken. Will justice ever truly be served for Codi? And more importantly, will his story lead to changes that protect other vulnerable children from a similar fate? The disappearance of 4-year-old Codi Bigsby in January 2022 shocked Hampton, Virginia, but as the days dragged on, cracks began to appear in the story his father, Codi Bigsby, told investigators. With every passing hour, Codi's demeanor, statements, and history raised red flags that painted a troubling picture. From the moment Codi stepped into the police interrogation room, investigators felt something was off. He wasn't the panicked father desperate for answers. Instead, he appeared eerily calm. At first glance, it might seem like composure, but law enforcement officers in Virginia noted his demeanor felt detached, as though he was rehearsing a role. His timeline of events, the crucial details that might help locate his son, began to unravel under scrutiny. Initially, Codi claimed he last saw Codi at home in their apartment the night before he reported him missing. But when detectives dug deeper, neighbors provided conflicting accounts. One neighbor stated they hadn't seen Codi in weeks, while another insisted they heard strange arguments late at night just days prior. Why were these discrepancies so glaring? Why did no one seem to corroborate Codi's account of the days leading up to Codi's disappearance? As investigators pressed on, troubling details about Codi's past began to emerge. A search of public records in Virginia revealed multiple prior complaints of neglect against him, though none had escalated into formal charges. In one incident, social workers were alerted after Codi was found wandering alone near a busy street. Despite these warning signs, Codi maintained custody of his children. Could this have been a failure of the system to protect an innocent child? The most damning moment came when Codi's timeline and testimony collided with physical evidence. Surveillance footage obtained from a nearby property showed that, on the night Codi claimed Codi was home safe, no child was visible entering or leaving the apartment. Investigators also discovered that Codi had made an unusual trip to a wooded area about 2 weeks before reporting his son missing. The police received tips from Hampton residents who claimed they saw Codi acting suspiciously, including one witness who remembered him dumping what appeared to be large bags at a construction site. As authorities pieced together their findings, they executed a thorough search of Codi's home. What they found sent shockwaves through the community. Evidence of cleaning supplies, bleach, heavy-duty gloves, and even torn pieces of what appeared to be a child's bedding were recovered. Investigators noted that the apartment's smell suggested something had been recently sanitized. Why would a grieving father need to scrub his home so extensively just days after his son's disappearance? In an even more startling twist, forensic evidence suggested that some of the items recovered had traces of blood, but Codi was adamant in his interviews. "I didn't kill my son," he repeated, as if hoping to convince himself more than the officers in front of him. However, his statements were laced with contradictions. On one occasion, he mentioned Codi playing with a specific toy in his bedroom the day before he vanished, but officers found that toy, untouched, covered in a thin layer of dust, in a closet. These inconsistencies were not just frustrating for law enforcement, but emotionally devastating for the Hampton community. As the days turned into weeks, and then into months, Codi's behavior only fueled public suspicion. Why did he repeatedly refuse polygraph tests? Why did he change his story every time detectives cornered him with evidence? Perhaps the most chilling revelation came during Codi's third interrogation session. Under mounting pressure, he allegedly admitted to disciplining Codi too harshly one night and said the boy had fallen. Codi stopped short of providing more details, but investigators noted his sudden shift in demeanor, a break from the confident, unbothered man they had encountered before. The case seemed to take a darker turn. Why would a father cover up the death of his son rather than report it? Did guilt, shame, or fear of legal repercussions drive Codi's actions? These are the kinds of questions that keep parents awake at night, especially in Hampton, Virginia, a city reeling from the loss of a little boy they had barely gotten to know. For law enforcement, this case presented an agonizing challenge. They wanted to hold on to hope that Codi might still be alive, but as the evidence piled up, that hope became harder to cling to. Each lead they followed, whether it was combing through wooded areas or digging up construction sites, brought them closer to the heartbreaking reality that Codi might never be found. And with Corey's refusal to cooperate fully, investigators were left to navigate a maze of half-truths, contradictions, and lies. The delays and misdirection caused by Corey's behavior weren't just frustrating, they were devastating. How many hours were wasted chasing false leads when they could have been spent finding Codi? And more importantly, how could a father allegedly carry on with his life, knowing his son was likely gone? Did Corey's past encounters with Child Protective Services signal a system-wide failure? Should law enforcement have acted sooner when the inconsistencies in his story became clear? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, how many other cases like this go unnoticed or unreported in communities across the country? Hampton, Virginia, became the epicenter of a devastating mystery. A story that left a hole in the hearts of its residents and raised chilling questions about how justice is pursued when the truth is shrouded in lies. If you're feeling the weight of Codi's story and you're asking yourself, how could this happen? You're not alone. Hit that subscribe button now so you can stay on top of stories that uncover the truth, spark important conversations, and demand accountability. Join the community, because when we come together, we can shed light on the cases that need our attention most. Don't let these stories be forgotten. Be part of the change. Codi Bigsby's short life, spent in the shadows of neglect and alleged abuse, remains a heartbreaking chapter in Hampton, Virginia's tragic history. As we piece together the events leading to his disappearance and presumed death, the stark reality of his life becomes painfully clear. Born into a world where he should have been protected and cherished, Codi Bigsby, a bright-eyed 4-year-old, was instead subjected to a life few could bear to imagine. Court records and witness testimonies paint a troubling picture of his final days. Descriptions of his father, Corey Bigsby, as an emotionally detached, controlling figure were recurring themes. Friends, neighbors, and even family members reportedly noticed signs of neglect, but few could have predicted the tragic conclusion. Codi's living conditions were bleak. Inside the modest Hampton apartment, the signs of neglect were said to be everywhere. Court documents revealed allegations of unsanitary conditions and scarce provisions for the children in Corey's care. Codi's siblings later described their father as a man with an unpredictable temper. His punishments were often harsh, leaving the young children in fear of the very person meant to nurture them. But what exactly happened to Codi? Investigators and prosecutors have speculated, based on evidence and testimony, about his final days. In one chilling account, a former neighbor reported hearing loud arguments coming from the apartment just days before Codi's disappearance. Was this a sign of escalating violence? Or could it have been the tragic moment when Corey's frustration boiled over into something irreparable? Witness statements suggest that Corey Bigsby's disciplinary actions may have crossed a fatal line. Theories abound about whether Codi's death resulted from a sudden, uncontrollable outburst or a more sinister, premeditated act. Forensic evidence recovered during the investigation hinted at the possibility of trauma, though Corey has never admitted to directly harming his son. His carefully worded confessions and repeated denials leave room for speculation but little clarity. What makes this case even more gut-wrenching is the involvement, or lack thereof, of external systems. Hampton's Child Welfare Services had no documented interventions in Codi's case before his disappearance. This raises difficult questions. Did the system fail him? Were there missed opportunities to save Codi before it was too late? Or was this a case of a family slipping through the cracks, unnoticed until tragedy struck? One particularly haunting detail emerged during court proceedings: the discovery of multiple bruises and injuries on Codi's siblings. These injuries were consistent with physical abuse, according to medical experts, fueling suspicions that Codi may have suffered a similar fate. However, without his body, definitive answers remain elusive. As days turned into weeks without finding Codi, public scrutiny shifted. Many began to question Corey Bigsby's version of events. If Codi's death was truly accidental, as some theorized, Why didn't Codi report it? Why dispose of a body rather than call for help? This evasive behavior only deepened the public's suspicion and further painted Codi as a man unwilling to accept responsibility for his actions. Yet, in the absence of hard evidence, the circumstances surrounding Codi's death remain a tragic mystery. Was it a moment of uncontrolled rage where Codi's actions led to irreversible harm? Or was it something premeditated? A calculated move to rid himself of a child he saw as a burden? These questions linger, sparking debates across the country and dividing public opinion on the true nature of Codi Bigsby's crime. Beyond the speculations of what happened that fateful day lies an even darker truth about the systemic failures that allowed this tragedy to unfold. If there were earlier signs of neglect, why were they not acted upon? Could intervention have saved Codi's life? Or was his fate sealed the moment he was born into an environment of chaos and instability? The reality of Codi's life, and his untimely death, is not just a story about one family's tragedy but a reflection of broader societal issues. How do we, as a community, protect children like Codi when their cries for help are drowned out by silence? And what could have been done to prevent this heartbreaking loss in Hampton, Virginia, where the shadow of this case continues to loom over the community? As we reflect on Codi's final days, the haunting questions remain. Was this preventable? Were there warning signs that no one heeded? And most disturbingly, how many other children, like Codi, are still living in similar, invisible despair? The trial of Codi Bigsby in 2024, in the state of Virginia, United States, became a defining moment for Hampton's justice system. Codi Bigsby, accused of the murder of his 4-year-old son Codi, faced the full force of public outrage and legal scrutiny. The court proceedings painted a harrowing picture of the events leading up to Codi's death and the aftermath that left the community divided. The prosecution's arguments were damning. They emphasized the timeline inconsistencies in Codi's statements and highlighted the forensic evidence found at his home. Evidence that, according to prosecutors, tied him to the crime. Blood traces in areas that Codi couldn't explain, signs of physical abuse from autopsy findings, and witness testimonies from neighbors all came together to create a narrative of deliberate harm. But the defense team was relentless in their attempt to shift the blame. They painted Codi as a struggling single father, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility. They argued that his inconsistent statements were not proof of guilt, but the reaction of a grieving father under immense pressure. Moreover, the defense raised questions about the police investigation, claiming that the authorities had rushed to judgment and ignored other potential suspects or explanations for Codi's disappearance. The trial was filled with emotional testimonies. Neighbors recounted hearing shouting and loud noises coming from Codi's home in the days leading up to Codi's death. One witness claimed they had seen Codi with bruises on his arms, bruises that could have been from restraining a struggling child. The most heart-wrenching testimony, however, came from Codi's mother, who took the stand in tears, speaking of her regret for not being present to protect her son. For the Hampton community, this trial was not just about Codi Bigsby. It was about the failures of a system that had repeatedly overlooked red flags. Why hadn't social services intervened earlier? Why had the police been unable to locate Codi before his tragic death? These questions fueled debates on social media and in local forums, with some blaming Codi entirely, while others pointed to systemic failures. The jury's decision was a pivotal moment. After days of deliberation, they returned with a guilty verdict. Codi Bigsby was convicted of murder in the first degree and child abuse, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But even as the sentence was read, the courtroom remained divided. Some in the audience felt justice had been served. For them, Codi's conviction was a necessary step toward closure for Codi's tragic death. Others, however, questioned whether the evidence presented was strong enough to rule out reasonable doubt. Were there unanswered questions about the role of others in Codi's life, or potential alternative scenarios? Was Codi truly a cold-blooded murderer, or was he a broken man who snapped under the weight of his own struggles? Did the justice system do enough to ensure a fair trial, or was Codi's conviction influenced by public outrage rather than solid evidence? And most critically, could Codi's death have been prevented if the warning signs had been taken more seriously by Child Protective Services and the authorities? The sentencing left lingering debates about accountability. Was Codi solely responsible for Codi's death, or was his fate sealed by a system that had failed him as much as it had failed his son? These questions continue to haunt the Hampton community, sparking discussions on social media and dividing public opinion even years after the trial. The trial of Codi Bigsby may have concluded, but the wounds it left in the state of Virginia, and especially in Hampton, remain open. The tragedy of Codi's life and death serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and accountability, both within families and in the systems meant to protect the most vulnerable among us. Codi Bigsby's tragic actions, as heinous as they were, have reverberated beyond just the confines of his own home, shaking the Hampton community and drawing the attention of people across the country. This case isn't just about a lost child. It's about an entire system that failed to protect him. The very fabric of this tight-knit neighborhood was torn apart, and the unsettling truth about what happened to little Codi Bigsby continues to haunt those who once knew him. Even now, one of the most chilling and unresolved questions lingers. What happened to Codi's body? Despite intense investigations, the whereabouts of Codi's remains remain unknown. His father, Codi, has offered no answers. In a case where so many key pieces seem to be missing, one can't help but ask, was there more that could have been done to prevent this from happening? How could a father be allowed to slip through the cracks and commit such a horrific crime? The broader question emerges. Were there other failures within the system that allowed this tragedy to occur? It's a painful, difficult conversation to have, but it's one that needs to be explored. From the very first signs of abuse, how was the child welfare system so slow to respond? How could such a young, vulnerable life be subjected to such horrific treatment under the radar for so long? As people in Hampton, Virginia, and across the country grapple with this devastating loss, they can't help but feel the anger and sadness that come with unanswered questions. The pain of knowing that Codi could still be here today, if only those failures hadn't occurred, weighs heavy on many hearts. And so we ask, is this just another tragedy in a long line of preventable deaths? Or is it a wake-up call for us to take more responsibility? The legacy of Codi's short life is not just one of heartbreak. It's a reminder that we cannot afford to ignore the children around us. The tragedy is a reflection of how much more needs to be done to protect the most vulnerable members of our society. The community of Hampton, Virginia, is forever marked by this nightmare. The echoes of Codi's story are not something anyone can forget, and it forces us to look inward, questioning the very system designed to protect our children. How many more children must endure such suffering before real change takes place? As we close this chapter, remember that no tragedy is truly over if we don't learn from it. Vigilance, accountability, and compassion are the keys to ensuring no other child suffers the same fate. Let us all carry the weight of this story with us. Let us not forget Codi Bigsby and what happened to him, and let us not let his death be in vain. The road ahead requires us to be the guardians of our communities, and the pain of this tragedy pushes us to demand more. More for the children, more for justice, and more for a future where such horrors are prevented. We leave you with a question that is both painful and necessary. What will it take for us to demand change? If this story moved you, if you felt the anger and heartbreak of Codi's tragic loss, then don't just walk away. Subscribe now to stay informed, to be part of the conversation, and to make sure we never forget the lessons this tragedy teaches us. Click that subscribe button, because stories like this demand attention, and we need your voice to help bring about change. Join us and never miss a video that dives deep into the cases that deserve to be remembered.